The wind hunts. It drags razors of snow across the red stone and cuts every inch of skin it can find. The sound is a low animal growl under the white roar, and the cold climbs bones like a thief with quiet hands. In that storm, the land does not sit still. It moves, it prowls, it waits for the slip. Lydia Hart leans into it, rope around her waist, sleeves stiff with frost, eyes split from squinting. She is 27 and thin from a winter of not eating first. A little girl, Rose, rides low in a blanket on the sled behind, her lips the blue of creek glass. Ahead, a horse shakes ice from its mane and blows steam into the gray. Beside the horse walks a Diné man, with snow crusting his braids. His name is Bidsy Nez. He taps the ground with a willow staff and listens to the storm as if it speaks to him alone. The river is a sheet of dull slate. It still looks solid, but the sound under it is moving water and the twang of something ready to snap. Lydia tests the near edge with her boot. The ice booms back. She swallows. "We have to cross," she says, voice small in the white. Nez kneels and presses his ear to the ice. The wind claws at his cheek. "We cross now or we wait and die," he says, and his tone is flat, not cruel, just the shape of the truth. He takes the sled rope from Lydia and ties a narrow loop in it. The knot is quick and careful, a kind that will hold, but release with one pull. His hands move like he learned them from his grandfather. Hold to the horse's tail, not the rope. If the ice opens, the horse knows home. Rose whispers from the blanket, "Mama." It floats light, like a leaf the storm forgot to grab. "I'm here," Lydia says, and puts her bare palm on Rose's cheek just long enough to feel that the child is still warm on the surface. Underneath, the cold is winning. They step onto the river. The ice sings one long note, then several short ones like a harp out of tune. Each step is a question. Each answer is a sound they may not have time to hear. The horse places its feet with the focus of an animal that has learned to count. Nez glances up at the far bank. A black shape waits on the ridge. A rider. Another slides from behind a juniper, a rifle held low against a coat that matches the rock. "Keep your eyes down," Nez says, calm as a man telling a boy to put away his shoes. "Do not look at them yet." Lydia hears it too. The soft click of a hammer set back, small even under the wind. Her breath staggers. The ice answers with a crack that zips like a whip under her left heel. On the far bank, the first rider lifts something from his saddle. It flashes once. Metal, not a mirror. A brand head, small, hand-forged, lashed to his pack. The iron looks like a crooked J over a bar. Lydia knows that shape. She has seen it burned into cattle that were not his, seen it sear in the night like a mean star. Her mouth is dry. "Talbot," she says, and the name sticks like ash. Griff Talbot has bought, and broken men from the Brazos to the San Juan. He buys debt the way other men buy coffee. He says Lydia owes him, and some papers say the same, and in a town where men nod at his boots, paper speaks loud. Talbot runs with 2 riders now, and one is a deputy by badge, and by whatever that badge allows. On the ice, a seam opens with a sigh. It yawns across their path like a sleepy mouth that will not close once it stretches. Nez pulls the sled back at an angle. The horse sets, muscle and breath and fear, and plants 2 hooves on a strip that sounds less hollow. Another click from the ridge. The deputy's coat lifts in the wind. Lydia sees the glint of a badge pin that has never known shame. Her stomach twists. In her satchel used to rest a ledger tear, one line burned away so clean that the town clerk said it never existed. That satchel is gone, stolen from her hand, the night she stumbled out of the assay office with truth in her mouth and smoke in her lungs. Nez's voice is low. "Do not stop. Do not run. Walk like you do not lie." A thin turquoise bead, chipped at one edge, hangs at his neck, tied with a strip of red cloth. When the wind lifts the cloth, the bead shines the color of a winter sky seen between clouds. Rose's eyes find it and stay there, steady, as if the bead is a small fire. On the ridge, Talbot sits his horse and lifts the brand iron like a joke, like a promise. The deputy calls out through his scarf, his words chopped by gusts. "Turn aside. We can talk, Ms. Hart." Nez doesn't look up. "When we reach the cottonwood with the lightning scar," he says to Lydia, "you will know why I do not speak my brother's real name." Then to Rose, "So only the child can hear. Shiaji, little one, hold your breath if you hear water laugh." The ice answers with a sudden crack, like a door slamming somewhere deep. "If you're watching, tell us where from, and keep your hands warm. When we reach that burned cottonwood, you'll learn which name on Talbot's papers never belonged to the man who wore it." The day before the storm, the sky was a hard blue, thin as a plate that's been washed too many times. Lydia stood in front of the mercantile, looking at flour she could not buy, and a small sack of cornmeal she could. The room inside her chest was empty and echoing. She had sold her ring to a gambler for half the price. And a lie. She had a child that coughed at night, and a cabin with a door that the wind had learned to open. She had a husband who was a year dead, and whose debts still breathed. People did not say his name when she passed. Some out of kindness, the kind that is a little like forgetting, and some because Talbot had told them not to. Where the ledger lay in the clerk's office, damp from a spill no one could explain, one line had been burned clean through. That line had been her husband's one good line, paid in full. It was gone now, a hole with singed edges that looked like it had always been a space. She had taken her satchel to carry that missing line in her hand, char and all. She had hidden it under spare cloth and a baby dress Rose had already grown out of. That night, someone had cut the strap while she was crossing the livery yard. The satchel fell away like a loose tooth. She heard feet and saw smoke, and then there had been no satchel, no burning proof, just a new quiet in her hands. Nez had been in the street that next morning, his horse drinking from a trough a boy chipped free of ice. He had not come to town for her. He had come for a salt block, cedar needles, and a coil of yucca cord he did not trust the store to keep dry. He stood the way mountain men stand in town, loose and apart, careful of other people's small storms. Their eyes met because a broom knocked over a crate and Rose laughed at the clatter. It was the first sound, like that Lydia had heard from her child in days. It pulled Nez's attention. He smiled without showing teeth. "Good laugh," he said. "Strong." Lydia had almost asked him then, almost said the thing that good settlers do not say aloud, because they are supposed to handle their own dead and their own food and their own winter. But the words stayed in her mouth, because Talbot walked by, and his men had a way of hearing things that were not meant for them. By sundown, clouds stacked like mountains that were moving. By night, the wind started to pull at the house, and Lydia knew the storm would try to take everything that wasn't nailed down, and some that was. She fed the last of the cornmeal to a pan, burned it on the bottom, and told Rose the black part was for the stove. They shared the good part with a little honey someone had left at the door, in an old jar with a dented lid. When the first plank creaked, and the second lifted at one edge, Lydia took the shawl from the peg and wrapped Rose twice. She listened to the wind find the gaps and explore them. She put her hand on the latch and felt it jump. She waited. Waiting was the thing she had learned to do after the long winter, when the army took men and land and promised returns like a preacher promises heaven. In the gray of morning, Nez came to the door with cedar smoke on his coat and snow already caked above his boots. He did not knock hard. He waited a breath. "Ya-ate," he said through the seam. "Good morning." Lydia let him in, because she knew two things. The door would break if she didn't, and Nez had looked at her child the way a man looks at the last spark in a cold hearth. He brought a small wrapped bundle. "Do not name your dead in a storm," he said softly, while he shook the snow from his shoulders. "Storms like names. But you can say this: we keep the living." He set the bundle by the fire, unwound the cloth, and showed a flat stone. He warmed it by the coals, then wrapped it again and tucked it under Rose's feet. Lydia's eyes stung. Maybe from the smoke, maybe not. "She's not yours to keep," she said too quick, the reflex of a life on the edge of taking. Nez nodded once. He did not flinch. "No, she is ours to keep alive." He met Lydia's eyes. "Ours. Understand?" Outside, a roof plank banged and banged, then tore away into the white. The house shifted. Lydia felt the change in the floor, the subtle warning of a thing about to unravel. "The creek will take the bridge by noon," Nez said. "If you stay, the drift will bury the door by night. I have a place in the rocks where the wind loses its teeth. We can reach it if we go now." Lydia looked at Rose. The child's breath was shallow and busy. Lydia had no more wood that did not spit ants when it burned. She had no flour, no room for pride. "I'm only trouble," she said, not as a complaint, more like a bad fact from a list. She took down the shawl and tied her hair back. "Tell me what to carry." Nez's mouth made the shape of a smile that didn't need to show itself. "You carry her," he said. "I will carry the day." He bent to the hearth, pinched out the last strong coal, and put it in a little metal box with holes punched by a nail. He slipped the box into his coat, like a secret. They left a note for the wind that said nothing and took everything that mattered. Lydia wore her husband's old coat, patched at the elbows with sacks. She wrapped Rose in every cloth that did not make her cough. Nez lashed the little sled to the horse's harness with a cord that looked too thin, but wasn't. He set a cradleboard on the sled, soft, worn, the buckskin laced with care, and showed Lydia how to bind Rose into it so she could sleep and breathe and still feel the world move. "Her feet go to the fire," he said, meaning the warm stone. "Her head to the wind so it will not sneak between the blankets." He tucked a strip of red cloth under Rose's jaw to keep it from shaking too hard. Lydia noticed the bead on his own necklace again. It wasn't bright. It was chipped, like it had done a job already. "What is that bead for?" she asked without meaning to. The question slipped. Maybe because the bead held her girl's eyes so steady. Nez touched it. "It remembers a promise," he said. "Right now, it remembers this one. This child will not be cold again." They stepped into the storm, and the door they left behind fell flat. The wind picked it up and threw it like a plate. Lydia flinched, and Rose startled awake and made a sound like a wounded bird. Nez put the willow staff down and listened through his hand to the way the ground carried the wind. He set a line toward the river, not straight, but true. They passed a cottonwood split by lightning the summer before. Black streak climbed its pale trunk, like smoke had painted it, and then stayed. Nez glanced at it, and then away, as if it were a person you nod to, but do not greet. "Do not say names there," he murmured. Lydia did not ask why. Halfway to the river, they cut across a flats where the snow drifted in long wave-like lines. The horse slowed and then stopped. Nez crouched and brushed away the top layer with his glove. Lydia peered over his shoulder and saw the dark marks pressed into the frozen earth, half moons with a bar over them, a brand mark, a hoof burned with metal, the same crooked J over a bar. "Talbots," she said, her mouth a thin slice. "Somebody wants you to see they came this way," Nez said. He brushed again and found a second set of tracks, lighter, the right forehoof chipped at the outer edge. He pointed. "That is the deputy's gelding, short stride, proud head, too proud, it will spook on the ice." He didn't sound hopeful when he said it. He sounded as if he were putting a word in a pocket to use later. Snow hissed like sand. Lydia tightened the blanket around Rose. The child's lashes had a crown of ice. She woke just enough to say, "Mama, will it be loud?" That was a child's way of asking if the world planned to break. Lydia bent close. "We will walk. We will not run. We will be small and quiet and stubborn. Loud things fall through." Nez glanced at her. "Good," he said. "Stubborn lives." They reached the river where the current slid like a mussel under glass. The ice near the bank was white and steady. The middle was gray and thinking. Nez stepped out first, spread his weight, and placed the staff ahead, tapping, listening. The horse followed, breath heavy, hooves not cracking but conversing with the ice in careful steps. Lydia tried to let her weight float into her hips, the way Nez had shown her. Let her feet find places instead of force them. On the far ridge, the riders appeared one by one, cut from the storm by the same harsh knife. Talbot in front, big and easy, hat low. The deputy, Harrow, behind. Badge a dark dot in a world of white. A third man Lydia didn't know, scarf up to his eyes, rifle resting idle in his hands, like he had nowhere he needed to be but here. "Stand easy," Talbot called, his voice shaped by a man who had been obeyed in too many counties. "No need to rush to your death on my account." Nez didn't turn his head. "Eyes down," he said again, and in case she still did not understand, he added, "Your feet will listen to your eyes. Do not tell them a lie." A long, thin crack walked across the ice ahead of them, and then stopped, as if it had remembered something important, and turned back. Lydia breathed and tasted iron. Wind pushed at her chest, and she pushed back. When they were 20 steps from the far side, the deputy rode a little way down the ridge and angled his horse toward the bank. He held up a folded paper. "Court order," he called. His voice had a smile in it that did not reach his eyes. "Come up neat, and we'll show you how ink makes things right. You too, Navajo. No law says you walk off." Nez's mouth did not move. "Paper tears in the snow," he said under his breath. "Not for them." Talbot laughed. It was a sound like a man pouring coins. "You took something of mine, Ms. Hart," he said, "and there's a little debt to settle. Small, really. Bring the girl, and we can make all this weather go away." Lydia's stomach dropped through the ice without breaking it. She knew what he meant. He meant the missing satchel and its burned-out truth. He meant the child as a weight he could use. Her hands shook once, and then went still. She did not look at him. She stared at the far bank, at a narrow strip where snow had drifted against brush and made a lip, a small protection, where a person could gather breath before the climb. The ice under Nez's staff shifted, a small groan of an old thing adjusting. He set the staff farther, tried the sound, accepted it. He spoke to the horse without words, and the horse answered with a step. Rose opened her eyes and fixed them on the turquoise bead again. Nez touched it with a finger and let it swing, a tiny, steady arc. "Watch," he whispered. "Not the men. This." In town, people said many things about Talbot. They said he could see through walls and paper both. They said he did not like to lose, especially not to women or to men with hair long enough to catch snow. They said he had once branded a steer with a mark that did not belong to him, and when the owner protested, the owner's ledger burned that same night. The next morning, the mark in the book was a ghost. It might never have sat there at all. Nez had his own stories about Talbot, none of them told to the wind. One was a memory of a man who wore a badge and smiled with his mouth when he said, "We just need your names," as if names were rocks he could put in his pocket. Another was of a winter, where the only safe names were the ones you whispered into a blanket, so no one could steal them. "Lydia," Nez said softly, "do not speak your husband's name here." "He is not here," she answered. "That is not why." he said. They reached the lip of snow at the far bank and stepped into the give of it. The horse surged once, hooves breaking through to mud. Lydia braced and pulled the sled at an angle so it wouldn't catch and tip. For a moment, the world was the sound of rope fibers singing and the quick leap of her heart. Then, they were on dirt, not ice. The ground felt loud after the river. Talbot brought his horse down the ridge at a walk, as if he had all winter. The deputy followed with the paper still held up like a flag that had never met a wind it did not like. The unknown rider slid off his horse and planted his feet at the bank, with the rifle balanced loose. He was ready to shoot a warning, or a rope, or a woman. Lydia couldn't tell which. Maybe he couldn't either. Nez stood between Lydia and the riders, not big enough to be a wall, steady enough to be a post you could tie your fear to. He set the willow staff into the bank and angled it so it would slow anything that tried to run at them. He reached into his coat and took out the small metal box that held the coal. He shook it once. It clinked like a bell, soft and private. Then he slipped it back. The wind pulled at his braids and lifted the red cloth at his neck. The bead flashed, sky color caught in a bad day. The deputy stopped 10 paces away and unfolded the paper with a salesman's flair. The ink was a sharp black that had not yet tasted dust. By order of the territorial court, he read, and his voice had that rhythm men use when they think the words are iron, and they are the hammer. Lydia Hart is to be seized and kept for debt to Mr. Griffin Talbot, being in the sum of, he paused and let Talbot say it, $72.60, Talbot said with a friendliness that felt like a hand at your back, near a cliff, plus costs. Nez's eyes did not move. He listened to the deputy's horse stamp and to the ice he had just left settle into new decisions. He listened to the wind make a low song in the reeds. Numbers change when a brand changes, he said, still not for them. So do names. Talbot swung the small iron brand in a lazy circle. You know this mark? He asked Lydia, a smile under his words. You ought to. Your man wore it on his conscience. He put it on steers that were not his. That's why the ledger does not love him anymore. That's why your line burned. Lydia felt it then, heat on her face from a fire that wasn't there. The ledger had been the only thing she could shout with, and when the line burned, her voice went with it. She could say her truth 1,000 times, and the town would shrug. Sheep cross a river in winter by putting their noses into the fur of the one in front. Townsfolk do the same. They follow the warm lie. Paper tears in the snow, Nez repeated, louder now, and the snow is honest today. He finally looked up at Talbot. You will not take this child. Talbot's eyes shifted to Rose as if seeing her for the first time. A small frown flickered. That's an ugly toy, he said, meaning the bead. Looks like a crack running through it. Nez's face did not change. Cracks make room, he said, for truth. Then to Lydia, softer. In our way, food must be shared. First bite proves the kin. He reached into his coat and pulled out a strip of dried meat and a small palm of ground juniper berry and salt. He broke the meat with his teeth and handed the first piece to Lydia without looking at Talbot. Eat, then give to your child, then to me. It was a small ceremony without ceremony, a rule made to tie 3 people in a place where a badge could not cut through. Lydia hesitated. She looked at the deputy with his paper. She looked at Talbot's easy grin. She looked at Rose with her eyes on the bead. The wind pushed at her back. She took the meat, chewed. It was hard and tasted like smoke and a summer she could not remember. She put a tiny bit on Rose's tongue. The child swallowed like it, hurt, and then licked the salt from her lip. Lydia handed the last piece to Nez, who ate it as if it were the best thing he had seen all day. Maybe it was. Talbot's smile thinned. That enough to make you family in your book? He asked. contempt held playful like a knife behind a magician's ear. In my book, Nez said, tilting his head. No. In the land's book. The land takes no paper. It takes steps, breath, bites. He tapped the willow staff once on the ground. We go. The deputy lifted the paper higher. Do not make me fire, he said, and the wind carried away the polite part of it, and left only the want. Lydia's stomach turned to water. If they ran, the shot would come. If they stayed, the paper would walk her back to town by the elbow, while the brand iron laughed. If she gave up the child, the law would call it sacrifice, and the town would call it sense. If she kept the child, the storm and the men would both try to take them. Nez stepped back, close enough that his coat brushed her sleeve. There is a rule near the cottonwood, he said low. Do not speak the dead. Do not say their names. There is another rule there. When men hold paper like knives, do not give them a name they can cut. Lydia closed her mouth on the word that had been about to come out. Her husband's name, which she had been ready to throw like a stone or a shield. She swallowed it back and felt it burn. Talbot nudged his horse a step closer. Snow slid from the animal's mane like a curtain. It's a sad truth, Ms. Hart, he said. You were married to a thief and a liar. He left you with bills and a brat. Let me show you how a gentleman solves things. Give me the girl to foster. You know we can find her a place. You'll work off the rest. Spring will come. You'll thank me with a straight back and clean hands. Rose made a small sound that did not belong to any language, fear trying not to cry. She clutched the edge of the cradle board with her mitten and looked at the bead. Lydia felt something old and sharp stand up inside her. It had slept for a year. It was awake now. No, she said. The word was a stone you could build on. She set her body between the sled and the men without thinking. The unknown rider lifted his rifle from idle to ready, slow, almost apologetic. The deputy's horse stamped and threw its head, irritated at a smell in the wind only it could name. Its right forehoof clipped the bank and slipped, and for a second, the badge wobbled with an ungainly flap of arms. His pride tugged silly. He yanked the reins hard. The horse's eyes went white. Nez took the moment. He did not run. He did something smaller. He tugged the sled a half step behind the willow and set his shoulder toward the drift that led into the brush, where the world was made of narrow, sharp places. Men on horses do not like to enter. He said to Lydia, walk, not fast, just go. If a bullet wants you, it will have to work. A shot, cracked. It did not try to kill. It tried to scare. It hit the bank above them and kicked down powder and a small hail of sand. Rose flinched and then went still. Lydia blinked away grit. Another shot went wide, on purpose, or because the deputy's horse danced its nonsense. Talbot did not fire. Talbot watched. They moved into the brush's thin hallway. Snow laid on the branches and slid down their necks like cold hands. The willow staff clicked against roots. The horse tucked its chin and trusted their feet. The wind got quieter. Storms do not love tight places. Behind them, the deputy cursed at his mount. Talbot laughed once, and the unknown rider muttered, "Just wing her," as if talk could make a bullet behave. No shot came. The brush did its job. It took big men and big animals and asked them rude questions about their choices. They climbed a low shoulder of rock and slid down the other side into a wash that cut between red walls. The wind ran over the top and forgot to come down. Lydia's legs shook from cold and from quiet fear that had worked all her muscles while she stood still. Nez led them into a wedge where two boulders leaned and made a mouth for shelter. He ducked at the last step, a habit, and Lydia copied him, because habits that keep a man alive are cheap to borrow. Inside, the air held the memory of fires older than this day. Little scratches on the rock showed where someone had tied horses, many someones. Many days. Nez unlatched Rose from the cradleboard and set her near the wall, where the rock gave back a little of her heat. He took out the metal box and opened it. The coal inside still glowed the color of a heartbeat that refuses to stop. He set cedar needles on it. Smoke rose with a smell that made Lydia think of a place that had never been cold. "Do not feed it big," he said. "Let it breathe small. Smoke will not run outside to tell a man your secrets if you teach it manners." Lydia rubbed Rose's hands and blew warm breath into her mittens. The child's eyes went from the bead to the coal to her mother's face, deciding where to rest. She chose the bead again. "Pretty," she said. "It is ugly," Nez said, and his voice was gentle. "Ugly things work harder. They stay when shiny ones leave." "Where did you get it?" Lydia asked. Nez's jaw flexed. "My sister," he said. "She brought it back to me after a day I could not follow her. Do not say her name here." He looked at the sheltered mouth of rock. "Not in this weather." Lydia nodded. She did not press. People in this country keep grief like other people keep silver. Quiet. Close. He sliced thin meat and gave Lydia the first bite. She passed to Rose. Then he took his own. The rule was small, but felt like a rope they could all hold. Outside, the storm threw itself against the rocks and forgot where the door was. Time became a chore. Warm this. Listen. Step outside to empty the small kettle and check the trail. Come back. Wait. The horse stood patient in the pinch of two boulders, tail against the wind, the way a good horse knows to make a room for itself. At dusk, that looked like midnight, a shadow moved past the washmouth and did not stop. Nez put 2 fingers to the ground and felt it shake. A tiny thing. A note in the bass of a drum. He looked at Lydia and put his finger to his lips. She gathered Rose close and tucked the blanket higher. The child slept anyway. Children and the very old sleep when they must. The shadow paused where a man would, at a place with a view. The smell of cheap tobacco drifted, not Talbot's. Talbot smelled like horse oil and money. This was a hand that bought tobacco by the pinch and rolled it with spit. The shadow moved on. Snow swallowed his tracks as fast as he made them, a small mercy that does not last long. Nez settled back. He looked at Lydia as if he had made up his mind about something and now needed to tell it. "If I die," he said matter of fact, "you take that bead. Put it around her neck. It will tell a woman on the second day of sun where to find you." Lydia stared. "What woman?" "My aunt," he said. "She counts babies and horse ribs and does not lose either. She knows this bead. It is cracked because I broke a rule one summer. She reminds me." "What rule?" He met her eyes. "Do not promise what you cannot carry, with both arms." He glanced at Rose. "I can carry this." Lydia wanted to say she did not need promises from men. She wanted to say she had been a wife and a widow and did not collect new oaths. But the words sat heavy and wise in the storm. "This child will not be cold again." She swallowed and said, "I will keep the bead on her if you fall, but you won't." Outside, a branch broke under weight. Snow tumbled like a sack of flour torn open. Nez's head turned. He listened. "They will try the wash by dawn," he said. "Badge men wake early, when they mean to do wrong, and call it duty." "Then we move before," Lydia said. He nodded once. Before. She tried to sleep. Storms do not let mothers sleep. She watched the coal shrink. She watched Nez rest, with one eye half open, the way men who have been ambushed every way a man can be ambushed rest. She watched Rose breathe in small puffs that made little clouds and then disappear. At a time that felt like the world's slowest minute, the wind shifted and loosened its grip. The sound changed from claws to a dull hand pressing. Nez sat up. "Now," he said. He closed the coal box on its red heart and tucked it away. He bound Rose to the cradleboard with hands that did not shake. He handed Lydia the rope. "Hold the tail," he said again, and Lydia did not argue. She had seen the ice. They slid from the shelter and moved like ghosts under a sky that could not decide whether to snow or break. The wash ran north, then east, then spilled into a flats where junipers stood like hunched men who had changed their minds. Nez stopped at a set of tracks, shallow in the drift. He crouched and touched them. "One horse," he said. "Old, heavy man." He pointed to where the snow showed a chain of small, sharp points across the horse's path. Coyote passed. He did not stop. "Good. Coyotes know when men are fools." Lydia almost laughed and then didn't. The sound caught and turned into breath, because breath was more useful. They reached a shape in the gloom, the cottonwood with the lightning scar. Even in this light, the black streak looked fresh, as if thunder had drawn it an hour ago. The branch that had split lay beside the trunk, half buried in snow. Nez touched the bark with his glove and then drew his hand back, respectful as a man at a door he does not open. "This is where I tell you something," he said. "Tell me later," Lydia said. "Tell me when we are not between paper and a river." He shook his head. "Later crawls away. Now listens." He told her how a summer back, a man with a badge and a man without came to a hogan on a night the air held smoke from a far fire. They wanted names. They always want names. Nez's sister sat with her baby, and the men said the brand on a neighbor's cattle was wrong, and they needed to know who saw, who burned, who cut the fence. They offered coin and sugar, and the kind of pardon that lasts until it doesn't. Nez's sister did not speak. She went on feeding her child, and did not look up. Men do not love it when a woman does not look up. One man slapped the door. The badge smiled. He said a name. He said Nez's birth name, not the small one he wears now. He said it soft, and felt pleased when Nez froze. He wrote it down. "Names make traps," Nez said. He set one. He set it at this tree, with a promise for the dawn. We were to meet and speak and make paper true. He looked at the scar. Before dawn, the sky broke this tree. The men did not come. Later, the ledger had a line that ate itself, a hole where truth should be. That is the day I stopped letting my brother's name out where the wind could hear it. Lydia tasted the air. It held old anger and newer fear. She thought of her husband's line burned in the book and the way Talbot grinned about it. She thought of names as nets and of how easy it is to tangle yourself. A crow flapped from the branch and croaked once. Rude. Rose stirred. Nez touched the bead and then tucked it under his collar as if to hide it from whatever listened from trees. They pressed on. The sky eroded into a pale that wasn't light yet. The storm had spent most of itself and lay around them in drifts like a tired animal. The wind huffed and then forgot to finish a thought. They had almost reached a run of low stone when a voice came from the left, close and careful. "That's far enough." Talbot stepped out from behind a juniper. Snow dusted his hat and shoulders. He looked fresh, as if men like him could sleep in weather that turned other men into sticks. The deputy eased in from the right, horse under him, paper tucked away now that showtime was past. The unknown rider was a few steps back, rifle ready, eyes bored. Nez did not bring up the staff. He did not look for the best rock to throw. He put his hands out to his sides and showed they were empty. "You will not fire with the child here," he said. And it was not a question. It was a dare shaped like a statement. Talbot smiled. "No," he said easily. "We will not fire. We'll just talk. Talking is for church and cold mornings. This is both." He nodded toward the cradleboard. "Let me carry her while we walk to town, Ms. Hart. I've got a room where the stove eats like a bear. You can warm your nails on it." Lydia felt her throat tighten. She was so tired. Warmth like that sounded like a sin she would be forgiven for. She wanted to hand the child to anyone who had a door that did not rattle. She wanted to lie down and let someone else make the next 10 choices. She gathered herself and made the one she still had. "No," she said again, and the word built another stone in the small wall she was making. Talbot shrugged. Then the law does its job. He tipped his chin at the deputy. "Badge, read it again for the lady, so she can hear her last free minute." The deputy cleared his throat and reached into his coat. He unfolded the paper. The wind tried to take it and failed. He read the words that said, "Who owed what to whom?" And as he read, Nez's head tilted like a man, listening for a false note in a song. Nez said, quiet, as if speaking to the paper, "The mark you carry there, this crooked bar, was not on his cattle last spring. It was a bar above, not below. Your iron is new. Your book is new. Your truth is old mud." The deputy blinked. "What?" Nez pointed, not at the brand iron, but at Talbot's horse. "Your horse steps wide with his left hind when he is asked to climb. The mark you make on the ground changes. So does your story. You are lazy in your lies." Talbot's smile slipped a finger's width. He did not like being called lazy at anything. He looked at the unknown rider. The unknown rider's boredom woke up and showed a little interest. The deputy colored behind his scarf, not because Nez was right or wrong, but because someone had cut the silk of his moment. "Enough," Talbot said, pleasant again. He slid a hand into his coat. "We'll have the girl now and end this." Nez moved, not toward Talbot, but toward Lydia. He took the sled rope quick and gave it one pull that undid the knot he had tied on the river. "Hold to the tail," he said one more time, and then louder, to the horse. A word that was not English and not for us to repeat. The horse leapt. Snow blew. The sled lurched forward into the thin space between two low stones, where a man could walk, but a horse could not follow fast. Lydia stumbled and then found the run. Rose made a small sound and then went quiet, trusting the board and the rope and the pull. The unknown rider swung his rifle, but the line of shot was bad, full of rock and horse and law he only half respected. He swore. The deputy dug heels, and his horse balked at the stones. That old pride now turned to good sense. Talbot moved smooth and mean, stepped to cut them off at the end of the run, with the easy stride of a man who believes the world will always make room for him. Lydia and Nez burst from the gap into a bowl of rock, where sound bounced and confused. Nez did not slow. He set the staff and vaulted the low lip like a boy, then turned and offered Lydia his forearm. She took it and let him pull her up and over. The sled skidded, caught, and then popped free with a rip of leather that made her heart flinch. The rope held. The board held. Rose held. Talbot reached the lip as Lydia's boot slipped. Her knee banged stone. Stars burst behind her eyes. Talbot reached for the sled rope with a gloved hand. He caught it. For a heartbeat, they were tied. Talbot and Lydia, rope between them, Nez anchoring, horse straining, child lying still with her eyes on a bead under a man's collar. Talbot grinned. "Got you," he said, warm as a stove. Nez looked at Lydia. "Let go," he said, and in his tone there was no room for pride. Let it go. She knew what that meant. The sled would drop back. Rose would slide toward Talbot, toward the man who would say, "Foster," and mean, "keep." The only way to save her was to lose her. Or was there another way? The rope burned her palm. The storm roared. The deputy cursed. The unknown rider raised the gun. The horse squealed and threw its weight. Lydia did the worst, best thing she could think of. She threw herself forward, not backward, put all her weight into the lurch, and at the same time, Nez yanked the knottail with a snap. The rope went slack. Talbot fell backward with the sudden give, and sat down hard in the snow, surprise peeling his grin. The sled shot forward, free, skimming across the rock lip and into the bowl on the far side. Lydia stumbled with it. Nez grabbed her coat and hauled her clear before she could fall under the sled's runners. Talbot's laugh came back, short and angry. He stood, snow on his coat, like ash. "You clever little—" he began, and then he stopped, eyes narrowing. He had seen something he had not expected. He had seen the cradleboard's lace pattern, the way the buckskin was stitched with a small red diamond among blue, a pattern that did not belong to Lydia Hart's hands or her husband's people. He had seen the bead flash where it had slid from Nez's collar and come to rest against Rose's throat, like it had been meant for her, since it was chipped. Talbot's face changed. He looked at Nez with a new thing in his eyes. Calculation warmed by old knowledge. "Well now," he said slowly, "that little trinket. I've seen that before." Nez's jaw tightened. Lydia felt the air in the bowl turn thin. The storm hushed as if to hear. Talbot lifted the brand iron and pointed with it, not at Lydia now, but at Nez, at the bead, at the board. "I do believe we've all been chasing the wrong story," he said, pleased again. "And I do believe your brother, or whatever you call him, would be interested to learn where his blood ended up." The deputy slid into view at the edge of the bowl, breath big in the cold badge flat. He held the paper but didn't wave it. He waited for Talbot's new angle. Nez did not blink. "Do not speak of blood here," he said, and the words had edges. Talbot's smile grew. "Why not? It's warm." The wind shifted and brought the smell of the river again, faint and far. Lydia's hands stung where the rope had burned them. She looked at Rose. The child reached a mitten toward the bead and touched it with a small tap. The bead swung. The red cloth fluttered. Nez took one breath. "Lydia," he said without moving his eyes from Talbot, "take her into the crack behind you. There is a tunnel. It is tight. It smells like bats. Go until you touch sand. Do not stop." "What about you?" she asked. "I will speak to a man who thinks he has learned a new name," he said. Talbot lifted the iron like a scepter. "No tunnels," he said, easy as ever. "You'll find those are for people who know the land. You don't." Lydia slipped her boot heel back until it found rock, and then a space behind it, narrow and dark. The cold from it was a different kind of cold, the deep sort that does not move much and does not have to. She looked at Nez. He did not look back. He was watching Talbot as if a mountain might decide to jump, and he needed to know which way. The deputy cleared his throat. "Enough talking." Talbot nodded. "You're right," he said. "Let's do some taking." The rifle came up. The horse snorted. The wind took a breath. Lydia pulled the sled toward the crack. It caught on a spur of rock. She yanked. It held. She yanked again, harder. It gave an inch. Talbot's eyes flicked. Just a second. Nez saw it. He moved. He did not move toward the rifle. He moved toward the iron brand in Talbot's hand, the small circle of heat that had not been heated this day, but still remembered every cow it had burned. He grabbed Talbot's wrist and twisted. Talbot's laugh died like a candle pinched. The unknown rider shouted. The deputy swore. The rifle cracked. Rocks spat chips. Lydia pulled the sled with a sound that was half a sob, half a snarl, and the board slid into the crack, then through. And then Rose was past, where a grown man could reach. Lydia followed, shoulders scraping stone. Behind her, Nez and Talbot went down in a knot of arms and coats and old hate. The deputy's boot skidded. The horse squealed. Snow fell in a small avalanche from the lip. The crack swallowed the light. The smell of bats came in a small wave. Sand kissed her fingers. She reached back for the sled rope, found it, and pulled. The cradleboard rattled on stone, then whispered on sand, and then slid smooth into dark. Behind her, Talbot's voice was close enough to feel. "You think you can hide," he said, breathless and amused at once. "But I know names. I know brands. I know where to sell a secret and where to buy one back. Lydia's heart banged like a fist on a locked door. She did not give it the key. She reached forward into the dark, where the tunnel narrowed and then turned. She could feel the air move, a slow spill, like a man breathing in sleep. She whispered, not a prayer, not a plan, just a promise that was a shape Nez had put in her mouth. This child will not be cold again. A hand grabbed her ankle. It was not Talbot's. It was Nez's. His grip was firm, not panicked. He pushed her foot forward deeper into the passage and let go. Then his hand was gone. A gun hammered. Stone rang. Snow hissed where a bullet broke it. Lydia pulled Rose into the bend. The tunnel swallowed them whole. Outside, the storm found its voice again and shouted over men's words. The land shifted its weight. The bowl held its echo. The deputy's paper lay in the snow, ink blurring, where a flake melted and ran. Talbot ground his teeth. Nez stood with one hand on the rock, breath like smoke that did not want to leave his body. You'll crawl back out, Talbot said, calm returning like a lake finds itself after you throw a rock in it. You'll crawl back for air, and I'll be here, with a better offer. Nez's eyes went to the cottonwood scar the wind had half hidden, and then back to the hole where Lydia and Rose had disappeared. He lifted his head and said a name the storm could not hear. Not his brother's, not the dead's, a name that belonged only to him. And then, as if it cost him nothing and everything, he said to Talbot, "You once burned a brand the wrong way. I watched the hair curl. I watched the man who owned that cow die the next month of a lie that ran like fire. I have owed you since. I will pay now." Talbot smiled slow. "Good," he said. "I do like a debt settled in person." Nez stepped away from the hole and into the open, the willow staff in his hand, the red cloth at his neck, the bead tucked out of sight. He drew the deputy's eye with the movement and set his body so the rifle would swing to him and not to the crack. Lydia, pressed into sand and dark and baby breath that smelled like smoke and salt, closed her eyes. She did not pray. She counted. Steps, breaths, the scrape of a boot, the click of a hammer, the new sound the storm made when men decided to be stupid. She reached forward with her free hand and found another breath of air, cooler and clean. She moved into it with the sled, pulling her child into a place the men did not know. Behind her, a voice she had begun to trust said something low and quick in a language this script will not write out, and the sound of a body hitting another body followed. And then, the sudden, sharp silence that land makes when it holds its breath so it can watch a choice. Snow fell. Ink ran. The bead remembered its promise. The tunnel breathed like a sleeping animal. Lydia pushed the sled by inches until the tight grew kinder, and the dark thinned to a thin blue. Sand found their boots. The ceiling rose. Cold eased from a knife to a hand. She turned her head and listened. The echo of men above had faded to a dull knock now and then, like a hammer put down and picked up, never quite used. She slipped out into a slot cut by water, older than every name on Talbot's papers. The walls were red and smooth, wet at their bellies, where melt made a quiet. The sky was a ribbon, the storm a rumor along it. She coaxed the horse through the narrow, with clicks Nez had taught her since morning, and did not stop until she smelled cedar smoke again. Thin and good, not loud enough to betray, but strong enough to welcome. The slot let them out into a little pocket where sheep had slept many nights. A low brush windbreak leaned against rock. A wood frame held a skin flap. Lydia hesitated. She had walked into other people's rooms before, when hunger was the bigger law, and she never forgot how it felt to be the one outside, cold, in the family light. She pulled the sled to the edge and waited, breath of fog around her mouth. A woman stepped from behind the windbreak as if the wind had made her. She was small and straight, hair wrapped in a dark cloth, eyes like wet flint. She looked at Lydia first, then at Rose, then at the bead that peeked from the child's blanket where it had slid loose in the crawl. The woman's gaze stopped there and softened at the edges. "Ya ate," she said, her voice quiet but not timid. "Good thing." Lydia swallowed her urge to explain. Words were a currency that bought trouble in this country. She dipped her head and put her hand to her own chest, then toward Rose, a simple please. The woman nodded once, went to the windbreak, and lifted the flap. Warmth fell out like a small cloak. Inside, the shelter was shallow and neat. A fire wore its smoke with manners. A pot hung on a hook, steam making a thread. Baskets sat along the wall, lidded. A cradleboard leaned near the door, its laces worn smooth by 1,000 rubs. Lydia saw the lacing pattern the way a seamstress sees a stitch. There, a small red diamond among blue. Her heart did something odd, like a skipped step. "Sit," the woman said, and with that word allowed Lydia to be less careful. "I am Saniye." She set out a strip of meat, thin and red-brown, and a small horn cup with something dark and sweet smelling. She broke the meat with her own teeth, chewed once, and held the first bite out to Lydia. "Our rule," she said. "First bite proves kin for the moment." Lydia took. She put a bit on Rose's tongue and watched the child come back to herself, like a coal, nursed with breath. Then she gave the last to Saniye and felt a knot undo in her shoulders. She did not say thank you yet. It would land thin. She let her eyes speak. Footsteps at the slot. Nez came through low, shoulders dusted white, face cut by new scrapes, where rock had asked for a toll. He looked first for the sled. He saw Lydia and the child, and let out a breath that was almost a laugh. His eyes found Saniye, and the quiet of them changed into respect that has old roots. "Aunt," he said. Saniye touched his cheek with 2 fingers, a small blessing, nothing fancy, and therefore heavier. "Bidzi," she said. "You brought the storm and the story." She glanced toward the slot's mouth where wind worried at the rock. "You also brought paper men. I smell them." Nez's mouth tilted. "They smell like ink and horse. You could find them in your sleep." Saniye made the juniper drink ready. She poured a little in the horn and gave it to Lydia. "Juniper warms the little breaths," she said, nodding at Rose. "Not too much. The little heart runs fast when too much." Lydia sipped, then touched the horn to Rose's lip. The child grimaced at the bitter and then reached her tongue for more as the warmth ran ahead of the taste. Saniye squinted at the bead. "That ugly thing still hangs on you," she said to Nez, and it sounded like a scold and a compliment. "I see it moved." "It moved for a reason," Nez said. "It met a child's eyes and promised a night." Saniye's mouth went soft. She tilted her head for a time, as if listening through all the rock to the slow drum of the land. "You will pay for that promise," she said. "Good. Worth the pain." She looked at Lydia. "Storm has its own law, but so do we. You will share food while you are here. You will not say the names of your lost. You will not lie when asked a question that matters." Lydia nodded. "I have nothing to hide that the wind hasn't already tried to steal." That sounded like bravado. She did not mean it so big. She meant it small, a little stake in the ground. Nez set the coal box near the fire. Shut. Saniye saw and grunted in approval. "You did not let it talk where it would gossip," she said. "Good. Smoke loves to tell tales." He set his willow staff by the door. He sat on his heels, like a man who had done that all his life, and would do it until his knees forgot how. "Talbot?" Saniye asked, and the name tasted like grit. "Yes," Nez said. "Him and his badge. Paper. Brand." Saniye spit into the fire, a pinch of disgust. "Brand men are lazy with truth. They like hot iron because it talks loud, but it cannot talk without a hand to hold it. Find the hand." Lydia touched the cradleboard's laces, not taking, just learning with her fingers. "This pattern," she said. I saw it as we crawled. One red among blue. Sanie's eyes sharpened. You have good eyes for tired. She reached past Lydia and lifted the board by its rawhide strap. This is mine. I made this for a child who needed a day in the shade. That child grew. I kept the board. Boards do that. They wait. Yours has how many days on it? Around, Lydia said, and made a circle with her fingers. Numbers were loose things in a winter like this. The answer was in the where, not a count. Enough that the wood listens to her weight now. Sanie nodded, set the board down, and covered it with a cloth. You have a strong mouth, she said to Lydia. Not too many words. Good. Words drink water. We do not have so much. Nez swallowed the last of the juniper and stood. I will check the back door, he said. Sanie nodded toward a seam at the rear, where two rocks pretended to be one. It opens when the wind asks please, she said. If you hear a raven 3 times, it is me telling you to run. If you hear a coyote laugh, it is men. Nez slid into the count. Don't think. A sheep bleated mild outside, as if to say the world was still a place where grass happened. Eat, Sanie said, and put thin flatbread by Lydia's hand, a smear of something ground with fat. Do not pretend you do not want to eat because there is a man in the snow. Men in the snow is normal. Hunger is not. Lydia ate. It felt like remembering how to live with 2 hands instead of 1. Nez came back with snow in his hair like gray. The slot runs to a dry fall, he said. We can lower the board if we must. The badge horse will not like it. Talbot will try the ridge. How long? Sanie asked without looking up, lifting a kettle lid to listen to the boil with her ear. An hour. Less if his pride runs fast, Nez said. Sanie nodded. Then you have half. You will teach this woman to see what she steps on. She will not be blind because she is scared. She pointed with her chin at Lydia's boots. Your feet will learn to read before your eyes forgive you. They went back into the white, to the windbreak's lee, where powder held prints like a book that forgot to close. Nez knelt and brushed the top crust with his glove. This, he said, tapping a deep round with a lip of pushed snow. Heavy. The man's belly leans. This, he tapped a shallow slot, long toe, little drag lines at the heel. Light, but proud. The horse fights the bit. That is the badge man. He traced the little scratches between. Coyote. He walked fast. He did not stop to listen because men were boring. He looked at Lydia. You do it. She crouched and set her palm flat over the deep one. Cold bit through skin to bone. She felt the push of weight, the little crumble at the edge where the hoof had slid a whisper. She touched the shallow and felt how the snow lifted, like a dress hem. Heavy, she said then. Proud. It felt like saying 2 letters and being sure. Good, Nez said. Now you will look where the crust sings. If it breaks under you, you were not listening. They went further, just to the slot mouth, and he showed her where wind carved a ripple, and how a ripple told the story of its maker. Long wind, short wind, angry wind, lazy wind. He pointed to a place where a juniper had brushed snow free with its skirt, and said, Under trees, snow is a liar. He showed the kind of quiet you listen for, when someone who smiles holds a rifle. They returned to the shelter before the quiet turned to new noise. Sanie had boiled juniper and a pinch of something that smelled like onion, but wasn't. Wild one, she said. Dig in the dry bed where the sand is soft in spring. Good for cough in winter. Not much, just enough to remind the lungs to be brave. Lydia held the horn for Rose and watched the child's color answer the hot. Relief made her shaky. Gratitude came out wrong when a person was this tired, so she kept it in her chest where it would stay warm and be ready later. Your man, Sanie said without cruelty. Is he in the ground or on the wind? Lydia stared at the fire. She had promised not to say names, but she could say the shape. Ground, she said. 6 feet. Rocks to keep coyotes out. I talked to him one night and said I would carry our child out of the winter if it broke all my teeth. Sanye made a small approving noise. Good promise. Teeth grow lies. You can spare some. She lifted a lock of her own hair and twisted it between fingers. When a big loss comes, we cut hair to tell the head to stop remembering so loud. But not now. Not in snow. Hair keeps head warm. There is a time for every rule, and a time to put it in your pocket. Nez watched the door. He did not sit long. A man who expects trouble stands, so his knees are already talking to him when running starts. I will go find the hook for our truth, he said. Lydia frowned. What hook? The land's hook, Nez said. Brand wrong, paper wrong, hoof right. He lifted his staff. There is a steer down in the wash beyond the ridge. I smelled it. Coyotes did not. The cold kept him clean. If the brand's bar is wrong on his hide, we will take the story to a place where even a badge has to listen. Where? Lydia asked. The trading post at Burnt Spring, he said. Clerk there owes Sanye a favor. Also, he likes to win games with paper. He will listen if we can bring him a mouth that talks louder than Talbot's smile. Sanye nodded once. He lost a horse to a river, and I found it for him on the second day, she said. He pays back slow, but he pays. Lydia looked from Rose to the slot to Nez. Her instinct was to wrap herself around the child and make a wall. But walls do not move, and moving was the only thing that had saved them since morning. I go, she said. You keep Rose. Sanye shook her head. No. He goes, she said, nodding at Nez. You will learn to lower a board down. A fall. Your hands are small. They listen better. 2 chords, 1 voice. We will be ready to go when he runs back with the truth in his coat. Nez tied his red cloth closer to his throat, so the bead hid again. He touched Rose's blanket, not the child. A small permission habit. Shiaji, he said, warm. Little one, watch the bead with your ears, not your eyes. Rose blinked slow. Children understand better than grown ones sometimes. He slipped out into the slot with the willow staff, a knife on his belt, and his breath steady. Sanye watched him go with eyes like a hawk that has seen 10 winters and does not waste a look. Come, she said to Lydia. We practice. They went to the back seam and opened it with a shoulder. The dry fall hung like a curtain of stone. Far below, sand lay soft, an old riverbed waiting for a flash flood that would write a new line. Sanye showed Lydia 2 cords of yucca, strong and golden. One holds, one talks, she said. You use both. She looped them through the cradleboard's top and showed the knot Nez had used on the river, the one that held like a stubborn idea but left when you asked it nice. You pull when I say pull. You let when I say let. You do not think you are smarter than rock. Lydia nodded. Her hands remembered ropes. She had pulled a sled, a plow, a man. She could pull a board. They lowered the empty board first and listened to the cord sing over stone. They brought it up, smooth. They added a sack of sand to weight it, and the cord told a different story, a heavier one, a careful one. They brought it up again, her palms hot, then cold. They found a rhythm. You will do it once only with the child, Sanye said. No practice when the breath counts. The wind outside changed its mind and came from the north now, sharp and straight. Sanye listened and then set the kettle to the side. Eat, she said. Then we run. The horse snorted at the door. Lydia went and put her hand under its jaw, where skin is thin and warm. We ask you to be a friend one more time, she murmured. The horse did not nod. Horses are not liars. But it breathed out and set its feet square. Nez did not make them wait long. He came back with snow on his lashes and a smell on his coat like dead grass and cold iron. He carried something wrapped in his own red cloth. He set it on the ground by the fire and opened the cloth like he was telling a story too big not to share. Inside lay a patch of hide, hair stiff with frost, brand burned neat, a crooked J over a bar. But the bar lay wrong, under the J when it should have been above, or above when it should have been below. Lydia felt the difference in her teeth. Men in town would think it was nothing. Men who lived in weather knew the weight of such a thing. Nez set the hide, so the light found it. Coyotes did not come, he said. Frozen fast. The man who burned this was in a hurry. The iron bit wrong once, and he did not fix it. His story will be lazy in the same way. Sanye touched the edge of the hide with 2 fingers. Ugly truth, she said, and her tone said, ugly truths are the only kind that last. She looked at Lydia. Wrap it. Warm it. Do not let it stink. We will make the clerk smell it before Talbot can wash his hands. Lydia wrapped the hide in the red cloth and felt the weight. It was not heavy. It was heavy like a word that ends a fight. The post is far, she said. 3 hours if the wind says yes, Nez said. Shorter if you stop being scared and start being stubborn again. He looked at Rose. The child's face had color now, pink under the smoke. Sleep had smoothed the worry lines between her brows. He looked at the bead where it had settled near her throat. Ugly and sure. We go to Burnt Spring, he said. We put this under the clerk's nose. We put the bar in his eyes. We let the land talk louder than paper. Then we make our trade. What trade? Lydia asked. Truth for time, Nez said. He will give us a day of his counter, a sheet, a signature that the badge must read even if he does not like it. Stay for 1 day. That is all we need. All? Lydia said, because all is a big word. All, Nez said, and his mouth was set to work. They made ready in a hurry that was careful. Sanier filled a small skin with water and tied it to Lydia's belt. She tucked 3 bits of juniper in a pouch and pushed it into Lydia's hand. For breath, she said. For fear. She wrapped the beads cord once around Rose's neck and once around the board's top strap, so it would not slip. If I shout Raven, you run, she said again. If I do not shout, you run anyway. They slipped from the pocket into the slot, then out, then into a maze of low rock and brush that only looked like a maze if you did not know. Nez knew. He took lines of shadow and ridges that made the wind lie down. He took the long way, when the short way would show their backs to a ridge. He took no way at all, when a coyote popped up ahead and looked at them like a judge. He waited for the animal to decide they were harmless, because sometimes letting a small boss feel big saves a big fight later. By mid-morning, the storm was thin cloth. The sky showed blue at the edges. The sun did not warm much, but it told Lydia where the day was. They crossed a flats where snow had hardened into a crust that held them if they walked where Nez walked, and broke if they tried to think for themselves. Do not make choices alone, he said without looking back. Choices are a team sport. At a low draw, a line shack squatted under a dead cottonwood, boards gray, door ajar. Smoke stains scrolled up over the eaves from 100 small fires. A horse stood tied to the rail, head low, bored. Nez lifted a hand, and they stopped as one organism. The horse, the sled, the woman, the child, the staff. He cocked his head. Hear that? Lydia did not, at first. Then she did. A scrape. Not the brag of boots, the whisper of paper on wood. Nez signaled for her to stay with the sled. He slid to the shack wall and looked through the split where a knot had fallen out years ago. He watched a minute that felt like 3. He came back and kept his voice low. Deputy, he said, he is alone. He warms his hands and reads his own power like a boy reads a dime novel. He has the papers. He has the brand iron wrapped in cloth like a baby. Lydia's jaw clenched. We could take the papers. We could run. Nez's eyes said yes and no at once. Maybe, he said. Or we take 1 page he does not watch. or we leave a new truth where his hand will find it by mistake." "What truth?" Lydia asked. He unwrapped the hide. The brand looked back, wrong as a lie in church. "This," he said. "He loves paper. Let him love this more. He will carry it for us. He will carry it to the clerk without knowing." They waited for a wind gust. It came, shouldering the shack until boards creaked complaint. Nez slipped inside then, and the wind went with him and did the talking. Lydia stood by the sled, eyes on the door, hand on Rose's board, where the child's finger tapped the bead like a tiny drum. Sanier had stayed behind at the slot mouth to erase their trail, with a brush of sage, and her own small steps zigzagged so a horse would get tired of guessing. Inside, the deputy muttered to his fire. He muttered to his paper. He said, 72 and 60, like the number made him a taller man. He did not hear Nez move the brand iron from one place to another. He did not feel the rolled hide slide into his saddlebag, where it would lie like a coiled snake until he opened it for the clerk, proud as a rooster. He did not see Nez's eyes read the top page and catch a name that did not fit the shape of the man who had worn it. Nez took nothing else. Taking is noisy. He left the shack with his breath neat. He crossed back to Lydia and put his hand to the sled rope. "We have our messenger," he said. "He will ride ahead. He will tell the clerk our truth before our mouths arrive." "What name?" Lydia whispered as they moved. Nez's face went still. He glanced back at the shack, at the tired horse, at the man who built his chest on paper. "The papers say your husband was Joshua Mallon," he said. He was not. He was another. A man who sold his good name cheap one summer, to a boy who needed a line in a book to marry a woman who would not wait. "My brother." He said the last words like bark. "But the name on Talbot's paper is not my brother's either. It is a name my brother took and then left when thunder broke the cottonwood. Talbot picked it up like a coin." Lydia's stomach went cold in a new way. "So the debt belongs to a name that belongs to no one," she said. Nez nodded. "To a ghost, to a lie grown fat." "What did your brother do?" she asked, before she could stop it. He shook his head once. "Do not say brother," he said, and she heard the rule, not the rebuke. He cut a fence he should not. He burned a brand wrong for a man who promised salt for winter. He left the name in the dirt when lightning told him it was time to be a new person. He did not come back to clean it. That is my anger, not yours, not the child's." He gave her a quick look, a thin smile with no teeth. "I told you at the river. When we reach the cottonwood, you will know why I do not say his real name." They moved with the wind now, not against it. The land went from knives to knuckles to a flat palm. Burnt Spring sat in a fold of that palm, a low building with a sign that had swung away in one storm and never found its way back. 2 wagons waited in the yard, wheels packed with ice. A dog lifted its head, decided these were people who brought no meat for dogs, and laid it back down. Inside, the clerk warmed his fingers over a stove that ticked and gave off a smell like iron and old stew. He was a pale man with a mouth that counted. He saw Lydia and Nez and the cradle board and placed them on some inner shelf. His eyes went to the red cloth bundle under Lydia's arm. He did not smile. He waited for the story to present itself like a coin. Before Nez could speak, the door banged again. The deputy came in with weather on his coat and pride under it. He slapped down his paper like a card in a game. "By order," he began. The clerk lifted a hand without looking, as if brushing a fly. "One moment," he said, and the tone of it reminded men like the deputy that this counter was his church. He tapped his finger on the paper, reading 4 lines in one glance. He nodded once at a name that did not live in this room. Nez set his palm on the counter, not hard, just there. Lydia laid the wrapped hide beside his hand, and kept her fingers on it a breath longer than needed. Sanye's rule, do not lie when asked a question that matters, rang in her head. She did not say a word. The deputy beat her to it. I have a debt. A writ, he said. 72 and 60. Plus costs. The clerk finished without interest. He lifted the paper to the light. He frowned as if the ink had offended him by being dull. He turned to the deputy's saddlebag without asking, the way men do in towns, where one man writes what the other man threatens. He opened the flap and pulled the brand iron out, as if checking its balance. He sniffed, made an oof face at the smell of leather and wet wool. He reached in again, and his hand found the rolled hide Nez had planted. The clerk tugged. The hide came out like a cough. He set it down, unrolled it, and the wrong brand stared back. Wrong, in a way, even a man who never left a stove could see. The clerk's eyes did a small, hungry thing. Men's eyes do, when a puzzle drops a piece on their desk, without them standing up. What's this? He said soft. A steer down in the wash, Nez said. Frozen honest. The deputy's face went through all the seasons at once. That's not... How did... He reached for the hide, then thought better. Touching evidence in this room broke a rule even men with badges felt. The clerk turned the hide with a stick. He did not look at the deputy when he said, Your bar is wrong. He looked at the mark, and the way the hair curled near the scar. This iron bit on the left, and was too quick. Lazy branding makes lazy paper. He looked up at Nez. You bring me this to what? Embarrass a creditor at my counter. To create a stay. Truth first, Nez said. Then paper. We ask one day for this woman and her child. You pin it. You make it loud. The clerk tasted the idea. He turned to Lydia finally. You are Hart, he said. Married to... He glanced at the writ, at the name. He paused half a breath. Joshua Mallon. Lydia looked him in the eye. I am Hart, she said. She let the other name slide off like thaw. The clerk watched that slide, and something in his shoulders softened. He liked people who used fewer lies than the room asked for. He reached under the counter and brought up a book. Not the county ledger. His. He licked a finger and flipped to a page. His mouth made a thin line at a note he had written last summer about brand disputes along the San Juan. He lifted a pen that had stained fingers from Galena's. To the rimrock. He dipped it, shook it, and then wrote a sentence that did not care about pride. Stay of seizure, due to evidence of contested brand. He said aloud as he wrote, because words said in rooms like this become heavier. He signed his name with a flourish only he admired. One day, he said, and held out the page to the deputy. The deputy took it because he had to. He hated the taste of it. You're making a mistake, he said, which was a way of saying, I have to go tell Talbot this will take longer. The clerk shrugged with one shoulder. I like my mistakes to be mine, he said, not his. He flicked his eyes at the wrong brand. You can show him this mistake too. The deputy folded the stay and jammed it into his coat with fingers that wanted to be out shooting something. He grabbed the saddlebag and stalked out, banging the door as if the building had insulted his mother. The dog lifted its head and sighed again. Nez watched him go with a face that told no story. Lydia let herself breathe in a big way for the first time since dawn. Her body shook because that is what bodies do after they remember they want to live. She looked at the clerk. Thank you, she said, and made the word small so it would fit in his ears. He nodded, a businessman's bow. Bring that hide to the sheriff if you like, he said, already bored with being brave. I will send the same line to his desk with the noon rider. It will reach before Talbot's story can change its shoes. He looked at the cradleboard and at Rose's eyes, which followed his pen with grave interest. One day, he said again, use it. They did. Sanier met them at the edge of the flats, eyes counting, fingers feeling for the bead on Rose, and the knot on the board, and the way Lydia set her shoulders. "Good," she said when she saw nothing missing that should be here, and one strange thing that might be their salvation. The way the land's truth had already walked into town ahead of them, held in a deputy's pride. "Now you run." "Where?" Lydia asked. She did not want to stop until a new season. Saniye turned her face toward the red hills, where wind slept in pockets and coyotes wrote their small stories. "To the Tula Marsh," she said. "There is mud there that will eat horse legs and not human ones if you walk where I tell you. Men like Talbot hate being small and wet. They will ride around. We will walk through." She smiled for the first time. It made her younger and not gentler. They cut southeast and the land changed from hard to soft, from scrape to suck. Tall, dry reeds whispered. Water under ice made a sound like swallowing. Saniye went first with a stick, poking, listening to the mud answer in bubbles and sighs. "Step here," she said, tapping, and Lydia put her foot where the stick had pointed, and nowhere else. She pulled the sled over places that looked like they would take it forever, and were kind, if asked right. Nez brought up the rear, eyes on the rim of the marsh where a lump of horse would appear if the men took the short way. He saw one, then another, dark spots, moving too quick for the mud. He counted 3. He listened to how far their anger carried on cold air. Not far enough to matter yet. They made the last run of marsh and came to a random coast of tussocks that lifted their boots up out of the wet. Saniye's breath smoked and her cheeks flamed, and she looked pleased the way people do who win by knowing something instead of owning it. "They will go to the ford," she said. "We will go to the broken fence." I always liked the broken fence. The broken fence was a line of posts that had leaned for 10 winters and collected stories. Feathers caught and wrote prayers for birds only. Tufts of sheep wool fluttered like flags. A small metal tag hung where a boy had played brand with a nail. Nez flicked it and it chimed. "Memory," he said. They threaded the posts and climbed a low rise. The world opened into a plain where the sun had finally come out and decided to work. It lit the cottonwoods along the river with a weak gold. It made the snow glitter in little panes. It made the men who waited ahead easy to see. 5 riders, not 3. Talbot at the center, deputy by his knee, the unknown bored man with the rifle, and 2 new shapes. One wore a hat too new for a winter like this. One had a scarf that had seen a fight worse than any we had watched so far. They sat their horses by the burned cottonwood, winter making their breath. Dragons. Saniye stopped. She put her hand, strong, small, on Lydia's sleeve. "We do not go into their mouth," she said. "We go into their ear." She angled toward a line of brush and stone that would let them approach on a slant, not head on. They moved slow, not creeping, just not offering themselves plainly. The men turned their horses to face them. Talbot's face wanted to smile and could not find the part that made it look like a kindness. The deputy had his paper again, now with the clerk's line added, a new weight on it. The unknown rider rolled his shoulders and sighed like theater. The man in the new hat took it off and ran his fingers through hair that did not know when to stop. The one with the scarred scarf watched Nez with a gaze that held a memory and a dare. Nez stopped before Lydia did. His body did not change, but his eyes went flat stones. He did not reach for the willow staff. He did not touch the bead. He set his feet and let the wind push his coat against his legs. Talbot lifted a hand as if he were about to auction something. "Well," he said, voice bright again. "The clerk likes to play judge. He says I must wait a day to collect what is mine. I can do that. I can always wait when the prize will be sweeter." He nodded at the man with the scarred scarf. "In the meantime, I thought you might like to see an old friend." The man with the scarf nudged his horse forward. He was lean in a way that used to be strength, and was now a kind of hunger. His hair was tied in a style that had learned town, but not loved it. His eyes went to the red cloth, the bead, the board. His mouth made a shape that tried to be a smile and failed, because too many winter nights had cracked it. "Bidsy," he said softly. Sanye's breath made no smoke for a heartbeat. Lydia felt the world tilt. Nez did not move. He did not answer. The man with the scarf lifted his chin at the burned cottonwood, at the scar down its trunk that looked like a name written by a god in a hurry. "We used to come here," he said, "when we wore one name between two boys. Remember?" Nez's jaw worked once, like a man adjusting a tooth that had broken before breakfast. "Do not speak that," he said, quiet and full. The man nodded as if a jury had upheld a point he'd made. "All right," he said. "New names then." "Fine. Talbot calls me Cole," he said, and the sound of it was wrong in the mouth that made it. "I call myself nothing when I can get away with it." He eyed the board again. He eyed the red diamond among blue on the lash pattern. He eyed the bead on the cord. His face went through a fast storm. "You brought my sister's promise into the snow," he said, and hurt punched through the calm like a fist through paper. "You did that without me." Talbot sat like a man who has just wound a clock, the last click. "We have something to discuss, the three of us," he said, smooth. "Names, brands, children, debt. You see how all these little words enjoy each other." He tipped his head toward Lydia with a show of politeness. "And you, Mrs. Hart, can rest your arms while men fix a thing too big for you." Sanye's hand tightened on Lydia's sleeve until it meant bruise later. She did not look away from Nez and the man who used to share his name. "Do not bargain with the dead or with men who smell like them," she said, out of the side of her mouth. "He is not dead, but he has eaten with them. His breath remembers." Nez took one step forward. It was not toward Talbot. It was toward the man in the scarred scarf. His voice had no shout. It had something harder. "I told the wind I would not speak your name where it could steal it," he said. "But I will say this in its face. The child is ours. Not mine alone. Not hers alone. Ours. The first bite was taken. The promise is tied." Cole, if that was a name he would allow here, flinched as if struck. He half turned as if to look for someone behind him to tell him what to feel. No one spoke. The bored rifleman stopped being bored. The deputy read his paper again, because it was easier than reading a family. Talbot clapped once, slow. "Beautiful," he said. "A real frontier arrangement. But we are not in your Hogan friends. We are at my cottonwood." He leaned down and lifted the small brand iron from his saddle strings. He swung it idly, lazy circle. "And my mark is on the story." The wind found a new note then. A low moan along the river as the ice gave a little and the world shifted from one leg to the other. A raven barked once from the far bank, and then again, and then, once more, again. Sanye's fingers dug in. "Raven," she said, hardly a breath. "Run." Nez did not run. He stepped between Lydia and the men and spoke to his brother in a voice that made the day thinner. "Together," he said, "or apart forever. Choose." Cole's eyes shone wet for a blink. The scar on his scarf caught light and looked like a cut still bleeding. He opened his mouth. The deputy moved his horse half a step, and the hoof hit a hollow. Ice cracked like a whip. Talbot's mount shied. The brand iron swung. Lydia grabbed the sled rope and felt it go tight in her hand and in her chest. Rose woke, eyes wide, bead bright. Cole closed his mouth and reached for the rifle slung on his friend's saddle. The river spoke louder, and the cottonwood that had been broken once made a sound like it remembered the day lightning wrote on it and decided to finish the sentence. The broken cottonwood groaned. Bark popped. Snow sifted in a thin veil from its scar. The river answered with a long tearing sound as the ice shelf let go of a thought it had been holding all morning. "Move," Sanye whispered, without moving her mouth. Nez stepped sideways, taking the space the sound gave, and Lydia pulled the sled into the shadow of brush, where hooves hesitated. Talbot's horse danced. The deputy's mount sank a knee and lurched, iron on ice, iron louder than sense. Cole's hand froze on the rifle strap. He looked at Nez and Sanier and Lydia, and then down at the small face on the cradleboard that watched everything with wide, unblinking eyes, and an ugly bead near her throat. A raven flapped once and barked a third time from the far bank. The sound dropped like a rock into the river noise. "Now," Sanier breathed. She tugged Lydia's sleeve, and they slid toward the brushy cut, where wind had laid snow in a thick, slow drift. It would take feet, not hooves. Talbot saw the motion. He kicked his horse to block and grinned, like a man finally seeing the last card he needed. "There," he said, and he pointed the brand iron, as if it could command more than cattle. "Take the girl." Cole yanked the rifle free and swung it not at Lydia, but at the unknown rider, who had been holding his own board weapon, as if waiting for a chance to be ugly. The rifle butt cracked the man's jaw. He dropped to a knee with a curse that steamed. The deputy swore and fumbled between paper and pistol, always a man with too many props in his hands. Talbot hauled his horse toward the cut. Nez moved straight for Talbot, the willow staff low. He didn't try to look big. He tried to be exactly where the iron couldn't reach, and the reins would tangle. "Bidsy," the deputy shouted, as if the name had papers on it. The sound slid off the wind and cut Cole instead. Old names are knives even when dulled by years. He flinched and lost a breath. The cottonwood's broken half shifted. It slid along its split, slow as an old animal standing. Snow fell in a curtain. Talbot's horse shied sideways and stamped a dark leg through thin ice where overflow water had crept up under snow. The animal screamed once. Talbot threw weight forward, trying to save its footing and his own. The brand iron swung wide. Nez stepped in and hooked the willow under Talbot's wrist. He twisted. The iron fell into the snow with a hiss, as if it had remembered a fire it wasn't near. Talbot snarled and went for the pistol on his belt, with the easy, practiced motion of a man who solves problems the same way every time. Cole kicked his horse to the side, blocking the deputy's line. "No," he said, voice cracked, eyes on Nez. "Not him. Not that. You don't give orders in my country." Talbot snapped, but his gun hand checked for a blink, surprised by the angle of the brother, who'd always come when money walked. Sanier's fingers found Lydia's sleeve hard again. "Into the ear," she said, and they slid behind the brush and into the cut. Knees brushing twigs, the sled bumping, Rose quiet, watching the beads swing with each jolt like a small clock that had decided to measure something other than time. The unknown rider recovered with a spit of blood and lifted his rifle in the old greedy way. He lined it on the shadow, moving through brush, on Sanier's back, not Lydia's, because his kind likes to pick a shape it thinks will make another shape scream. Cole saw it. He didn't think. He aimed low and fired twice into the snow at the man's horse. The animal reared. The shot went into sky and came back as a harmless echo. "Stop!" Cole barked at the world and at his own life. The world didn't. The cottonwood finished its thought and dropped a limb the size of a man across the path between Talbot and the cut. Snow leaped. Men swore. The deputy's horse flailed and went down on a knee again, hoof punching through slush that had pretended to be ground. The animal's fear filled the air like hot breath. Nez stepped in to keep Talbot from shooting the horse just to clear the way. That is a thing some men do, when time costs less than life. He shoved the pistol hand aside, the willow staff a bar, under Talbot's forearm. The shot went wild into the cottonwood scar, burning a fresh, ugly kiss into already burned bark. Talbot drove his shoulder into Nez's chest and hit like a fence post. He had weight and the practice of winning. They went down in churned snow. Nez rolled to keep the pistol away from Lydia's line. Talbot's fist found his ribs. Something in Nez's breath snapped sharp. He saw white for a blink and then red. And over the roar, he heard Sanier call like a hawk. Not a word, but a cut through weather. Lydia had the sled into the cut. She had one knee bloody from a rock, and the blood felt hot, which helped. She set the board against a brush tangle, put her body between Rose and the open, and turned back once because you can do both. Keep a child safe and refuse to let someone die ugly who has not earned it yet. Talbot earned it then. He got the pistol free. He cocked it. He found Nez's face with his will, if not with his aim, and the will was enough. Debt, he said, as if the word were a god. Nez didn't bother answering words with words. He reached for the only thing that would talk louder. He grabbed the small metal coal box, slipped from his coat in the scramble, and swung it hard into Talbot's wrist. The blow was not big. It was placed. Talbot's fingers opened, because men's fingers do that when a hot thing surprises them, even through glove and cold. The pistol fell into snow. It didn't go off. Not every story loves a trigger. Cole slid his horse between Talbot and the pistol and jumped down. He planted a boot on the gun, like he was pinning a snake. He looked at Nez, and the look on his face wasn't clean. It wasn't sorry enough for all the dirt, but it was facing the right way. "We end it," he said. Talbot stared at him, incredulous, as if a river had decided to ask his permission before flooding. "You?" he said, laughter thin and bright. "You end me? Boy, I bought the paper that made you a person when you were nothing. I wrote you on a line and put a girl in your arms. I can erase you with the same ink." There it was. Naked. Lydia felt it settle in her bones. The step they needed for the truth to stop slipping. She heard Nez's breath, rough now. Hear how it paused on pain and pressed on. She heard Sanier behind her say a word that sounded like a stone set well. "You bought a name," Nez said, on his knees, voice steady, as if he was standing above this, not below it. "Not a person. You traded a fence cut and a brand wrong for a wife and a winter, and you hung that stolen name on a man who is in the ground and a woman who eats last. You printed the ghost on your paper and then bragged to the sky when the ledger burned to hide your hands." Talbot swung his eyes to Lydia, as if remembering she had ears. "You hear him?" he said, amused again, charmed by his own appetite. "He's telling you the man you wed wasn't who he said. That makes your girl somebody's poker chip, not yours." Lydia's mouth leveled like a good barrel. "She is ours," she said, and no wind on the river moved that word. "We took the first bite together. We shared the law of this land. Yours is loud, ours is older." The deputy had his hand on the stay from the clerk and his eyes on the gun under Cole's boot, and didn't know which thing made him a man today. He decided on paper. By order. He tried again, hoarse now, as if embarrassed to be himself. Sanier stepped out of the brush, small and hard, and she carried the red-wrapped hide as if it were a Bible. She walked right up to the deputy's horse and slapped the hide onto the saddle horn under his nose. "Smell," she said. "Smell you're wrong. Men like smell more than reading." The deputy flinched at the stiffness and the raw iron stink. He looked at the brand, found the bar as wrong as the clerk had, and his spine did a small failure. Hope wears badges too sometimes, and they sag when winter blows. Cole knelt at Nez's side and put his shoulder under his brother's arm, without touching the bead or the red cloth. He looked at the cradle board in the cut, and then at Talbot's dark eyes, and then at the broken cottonwood. His face softened around the mouth for the first time. "I can't fix the Summers," he said to Nez, voice too low for the others. "I can fix this morning." He stood and faced Talbot. "You're done," he said. His hands shook and he made them stop. Talbot laughed, low, dangerous, like a cat that's worked out which bird is the slow one. You think one clerk and an ugly piece of hide unmake me? He whistled, a sharp note. The two riders at the edge, the new hat and the scarred scarf, nudged their horses forward, rifles up to shoulder, barrels steady, the kind of steady that comes from doing wrong often enough to do it smooth. Down, Sanier hissed. Lydia dropped to her knees in the cut, covering Rose without smothering the small face. Nez flattened. Cole stood in a fool's space between guns and family and did not move. The rifleman fired to bracket, not to kill. The old scare tactic, bullets stitching snow near, boots to remind a body how it feels. One shot clipped the cottonwood scar and knocked loose a plank of frozen bark. It slid and hit the river ice. The ice sighed and broke into plates that moved like tired monsters. Talbot smiled. Bring me the board, he told the men. Bring me the girl. We'll let the law figure out the rest in spring. Cole lifted his hands a little and walked forward slow, as if obeying. Don't, Nez whispered, and there was pleading in it, rare and raw. Cole didn't look back. He reached the first rifleman like a man greeting a neighbor. She's cold, he said soft. Don't scare her. The man sneered and kept his barrel on Nez. Cole moved fast then, faster than a winter-starved man should. He slapped the rifle aside and shoved the horse's shoulder into the second rider's mount. Hooves scrambled. The second shot went into the river. Ice shattered, with a noise like crockery, dropped from a shelf. The first rifleman swung the barrel with bad temper more than aim and cracked Cole across the temple. Cole staggered. Blood showed dark in the cold. He grabbed the saddle horn and held, jaw clenched, looking at Nez with apology and a dare. Talbot drew the spare pistol from his coat, the one men don't see, because he always pretends he only has one. Lydia saw the move and didn't think like a polite person. She grabbed the brand iron from the snow where it had fallen and threw, not at Talbot, at the deputy's horse. The iron hit the animal's flank with a thud that wasn't hot, but suggested pain. The horse bawled and jumped sideways into Talbot. Talbot's shot cracked into sky. The sound blew back in his face. His horse slipped on the melting edge and put a hoof through rotten ice. The animal lurched, went down with its forelegs, and Talbot pitched forward onto the river shelf, arms windmilling, fingers clawing for purchase on something that did not know how to be held. Rope, he shouted, voice breaking. Rope! No one had one out. The deputy fumbled and found only paper in his hand. The riflemen fought their mounts. Cole, bleeding, grabbed a knot of willow and tried to lean toward the edge, but the snow was treacherous, and his head was not straight. Nez got to his feet, chest tight with pain and breath as thin as new ice. He looked at Talbot where the river had him belly down, water slapping his wrists, ice plates knocking together like teeth. He could step forward with the willow staff and give the man a chance. He could watch the land take its own. He could do nothing and let justice be cold and easy. Sanier spoke without looking at him, which made the words heavier. If you let the river decide, it will ask for another payment later, she said. The land is not a thing you make do your killing. It is a thing you let teach you. Lydia heard that and felt every winter of her life under her boots. She made a choice that had nothing to do with loving Talbot or hating him. She took the yucca cord from her belt, the second one Sanier had given, and threw it low, past the slick, past the brag. The end hit Talbot's sleeve. He grabbed it like a drowning man in a story, because that is what he was now, and stories make people practical. Pull, Lydia said, and her voice had no tremble. Nez stepped in beside her and set the willow as a brace. Cole staggered to the cord, put his hands on it over Claire's, over Lydia's, over the woman's, shook his head as if to clear it, and pulled too. Do I help? The deputy said wildly. To whichever god made his badge shine. No one answered him. He shoved paper into his coat and took the cord with fingers that still smelled of ink. Talbot fought the water and the rope and his pride. He came up an elbow and slid and came up again. The cottonwood creaked as wind changed, and a small sound, like a laugh, came from the river as it accepted and then refused. They hauled together, not kind, just hard. Talbot came onto the bank on his knees, coughing up melt and a little blood from his bitten tongue. He looked up at the people who had not let the river end him and made a shape with his face that was not a smile and not thanks either. It was a man who knew he would owe and hated the taste. Saunier picked up the brand iron from where Lydia had dropped it and set it upright in the snow, as if it were a grave marker for a way of doing things. She said, plain, "You will go home now." Talbot wiped his mouth with the back of a glove. He shook water from his hat and set it back on his head and found his grin again, like a mask he had dropped and picked up. "I will go to town," he said, and the texture of his voice had changed. Less iron, more cloth. "I will tell them a clerk got excited about a hide in a storm. Then I will come back in a day and try again." He pushed to his feet with a wince he tried to hide. He looked at Cole with something between pity and threat. "If you ride with me, I forgive a winter," he said. "If you don't, I collect in spring with interest." Cole wiped blood from his eye and looked at Nez and Lydia and the cradleboard and the bead, and his mouth flattened. "I don't ride with anybody who points a gun at children," he said, and it sounded like a man saying his first true sentence in years. He reached to steady Nez, a brother's touch he had been stingy with. "I stay. I put my hands where they should have been." Talbot took that in, weighed it, and tucked it into whatever ledger he kept in his head, where people were entries with prices. He nodded to the deputy. "We're done with this sermon," he said. "Get my horse up. We will speak to the sheriff about how writing works in this county." The deputy opened his mouth and closed it. He looked at the wrong brand on the hide, and then at Talbot, and for once, money and paper were not the loudest things in the room. The river was. He swallowed. "Yes, Mr. Talbot," he said, but it came out without a spine. They left. Not far, not for long. Enough. Silence fell like a coat in the first safe minutes. The raven on the far bank croaked once as if to say, "See? See?" Lydia let the cord fall and cupped Rose's cheek. Warm. The child blinked and then smiled a little, not because she understood the law or history, but because the bead swung again, slow and faithful, and small things make children glad. Lydia's knees went soft, and she sat in the snow and laughed once and cried twice, and wiped it on her sleeve like a woman who has used sleeves for everything. Nez bent at the waist, hands on his thighs, breath a old bellows. Saunier touched the back of his neck with 2 fingers, slow, finding the places that had gone stiff. "You will feel like a board tomorrow," she said. "You will work anyway." Cole stood awkward at the edge of the little circle they had made. He had blood dripping into his collar and shame haloing him like heat. "I'm not asking for a place," he said to the air. "I know how that sounds in a winter. I'm asking for one job. I'll do it, and leave, if that is the rule." Nez straightened. His eyes were wet and flat and hard and not finished with anything. What job? He didn't offer coins or apologies. Work first. That's how hard countries speak. Cole pointed at the brand iron like it had told him to. "Take that to the sheriff with the hide," he said. "Make him write even if his hand shakes. I'll ride ahead and turn 2 men around on the road who'll fetch Talbot his replacement iron." He looked at Saunier. "If I say Raven 3 times, you run." Saunier's mouth twitched. "Men love to think they teach me my own rules," she said. But the edges of her words were kind. She pointed at his head. "Wash, then go. Blood brings coyotes who don't care about your names." They moved in those simple tasks that make shock small enough to carry. Lydia tucked Rose deeper and tied the board in the sled with the knot that let go when asked. Nez slung the hide over his shoulder. He put the bead under his collar again so that it lay against his skin like a coal. He picked up the brand iron and carried it like a stick that had done harm and was now a messenger. Before he mounted, Cole stood beside Lydia like a man at a grave. He isn't sure he has the right to visit. He looked down at Rose, at the tiny mitt on the board laces, at the little red diamond among blue that said, Sanie's hands had made this place safe. She's not mine by blood, he said, and the word didn't sound like failure, the way it often does when men discover that. But she is ours by that bite, and by this morning. He touched his chest, then the board, the same simple sign Lydia had made when she entered Sanie's fire. If I live, I bring back one day. If I die, don't say my name here. Say it into a blanket. Let it stick where it can't be stolen. Lydia nodded. She was not generous yet. That is not how winter gifts grow. But she was not mean either. Bring back the day, she said. The rest we will spend when we have heat. He swung up, swayed, then steadied. He rode toward the cut and was gone quick, a man suddenly good at straight lines. Go, Sanie told Nez. You come back by sunset or by moon. If you do not come, I will read the ground and find out whether I have to be angry or sad. Nez touched her hair lightly. Respect, not blessing. And then he looked at Lydia as if he had almost said a too heavy thing and changed his mind. Sand, he said instead. At the dry fall, you keep the board low. You listen to the chord sing. Don't be clever. I won't, she said. And he smiled at that the way a teacher smiles when a student says the smartest thing she's said all day. He rode to Burnt Spring with the brand iron, the hide, the bead hot on his skin, and the river's noise in his ears. The deputy would arrive slower, pride limping. Talbot would arrive loud. The clerk would make a face like a man tasting sour, but fair. The sheriff would grumble and write because paper that won't listen to a clerk sometimes listens to a winter when it's forced to. The day would be pinned. One ink line that meant feet could move without hands on them for a little while. Sometimes that is enough to turn a year. Lydia and Sanie took the child to the dry fall. The chords sang. The board slid down and kissed sand. Lydia followed, knees and hands, hair filled with stone smell and bat breath, and came out into a bowl of light that the sky had saved for brave women. She set Rose on her lap and let the child hold the bead with one mitten and sleep. She leaned her head back against rock that had been waiting for this head for longer than anyone knew. By late sun, Nez came back with ink on his glove, where he had touched paper to make it real, and dust in his teeth from riding hard. He had a bruise that would teach him to lie on his other side for a few nights, and eyes that had seen Talbot being told, one day, in front of men who had liked him best, when the law obeyed money. He had a letter in his coat, folded small, with the clerk's line, the sheriff's grudging mark, and a sentence that said, brand contest pending, seizure stayed, child not to be separated from caregiving mother without hearing. The hearing would be spring. The story would be different by then, or it wouldn't. Either way, they would not freeze today. Cole? Sanie asked. He turned the Iron Men, Nez said. He did it with lies that smelled like truth to them, which made me want to slap him and hug him, both. Then the second one decided to be brave for money and pulled a knife. Cole bled more. He laughed like an idiot and kept his horse between the other knife and me. He lives. He will live if he doesn't get clever. He will not be good at that. Sanie grunted. Men, she said, ancient judgment. We feed the child. We wrap the woman's knee. We let the wind be tired. They ate thin stew seasoned with juniper and the wild onion that was not onion and shared the first bites the right way. Lydia slept in bursts and woke to watch the bead and the coal and the line of the door. In one of the quiets, when the fire spoke softly and the wind had gone to bother another county, she told Nez a small truth, not a name, a shape. "I married a man because he said he would farm the dirt my father loved," she said. "He tried. He also played cards more than is safe. He borrowed from a grin and paid with his back. He died because winter does not forgive men who stand in it. To finish just one more hand." Talbot burned the one line that said, "We had been honest once." I have been hungry for a way to tell that to a piece of paper. Today, I am less hungry. Nez listened without trying to repair the past with comfort. "Tomorrow," he said, and the word was a work order, not a poem. "We will go to the far Hogans and ask for 2 old women to sit by this fire and make it official, the way this place understands official. They will take the first bite and put a cord around the board and say the word that says ours in a way that gets into paper slower, but gets into hearts faster." "What word is that?" Lydia asked. Nez's mouth made a small, amused shape. "Ours," he said, and she laughed, quiet, because sometimes the right words are the ones you already know. The next day broke clean, and so cold the air snapped when you bit it. They walked out under a sky that had decided to be new. The hearing would come in spring with grass and higher water, and men who had let winter make them meaner or kinder. Some would bring paper, some would bring hides. Some would bring their first bites and ask to stand inside a circle wider than the laws. At the cottonwood, the scar looked fresh again, where the bullet had burned it and where the brand iron had kissed it by accident. Lydia put her palm on the bark and kept her mouth shut. Names stay better when they are not thrown into weather. Rose touched the tree and said, "Solemn, hot." Lydia grinned and kissed her hair. "It was," she said. "Now it's done." They took the long way home, Sanier's home for as long as a person is cold and hungry, and left the river to argue with itself. Cole came at dusk, gray as rock, blood salt in his hair, grin like a boy who has won a stupid game and knows it. He stood outside the fire circle until Sanier nodded once, a small granting. He stepped in and sat on his heels and said nothing for so long, Lydia thought he had come with a mouth full of ash. Then he said to Nez, "I told my old name to a blanket, and I asked it to stay there. I want to learn to be a person who doesn't need paper to exist." Nez looked at him, whole and broken, and said, "Start with wood, chop it, then shut up while elders talk, then carry water, then shut up again." He handed him a tool. Cole took it and went outside to make himself the kind of warm that costs. Spring would bring another chapter, in a room with a man who loved pens, and another who loved coin, and a woman who had learned the difference between being saved by a rope and choosing to throw one. The hide would stink more by then, which was good. Truth should not be pleasant all the time. The clerk would scowl and make neat letters. The sheriff would scratch and look at his coffee like it was going to rescue him. Talbot would smile and count in his head and find his math had lost a digit. But that is not this winter's story. This winter's story ends with a night where the wind finally got bored and wandered off, and a small girl slept warm between a woman who had learned to take the first bite and a man whose bead had made a promise and kept it. It ends with Sanier braiding a short lock of Lydia's hair and tucking it in the crack near the fire pit, not as a sacred rite for show, but as a reminder to the head to stop remembering so loud when spring tries to tell it new songs. It ends with Nez stepping outside, looking up at a sky full of the same stars men lie under, when they're proud and when they're ashamed, and saying a name he would not say in a storm to the quiet where it could not be stolen. The wind hunts. But tonight, it hunts other places. In this place, a bead swings, ugly and perfect, and an old coal glows in a little box like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. A cradleboard with one red diamond among blue hangs near the door, waiting for morning. The land, predator and teacher both, rests its weight, just for a breath. If you made it this far, say where you're watching from. Next time, when the snow lets go and the sheriff pretends his pen is a river, we'll show you the paper that learned a new word, ours.